Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to our monthly revival here at Messina with Imam Tom Fakini. My name is Marwan, I'll be your co-MC tonight, along with...
I'm Shafaya, nice to meet you all.
Yes, so inshallah everyone just make sure that you register. And just before we start, we're going to have a short recitation from Brother Muhammad.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كذبت قوم لوط المرسلين إذ قال لهم أخوهم لوط ألا تتقون إني لكم رسول أمين فاتقوا الله وأطيعون وما أسألكم عليه من أجر إن أجري إلا على رب العالمين أتأتون الذكران من العالمين وتذرون ما خلق لكم ربكم من أزواجكم بل أنتم قوم عادون قالوا لئن لم تنته يا لوط لتكونن من المخرجين قال إني لعملكم من القالين رب نجني وأهلي مما يعملون فنجيناه وأهله أجمعين إلا عجوزا في الغابرين ثم دمرنا الآخرين وأمطرنا عليهم مطرا فساء مطر المنذرين إن في ذلك لآية وما كان أكثرهم مؤمنين وإن ربك لهو العزيز الرحيم صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad. And now Shafay will cover a couple of announcements, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Just a future notice. Inshallah, I know a lot of you are excited for this event, but please make sure to register at least the day before, so that way we can accommodate space and make sure we have a head count for food, which will be distributing later on in the evening. But I just wanted us to highlight a few programs that we have here in the center. So one is Mass Camp that is coming up on August 25th to the 28th. It's for ages 15 to 28. Make sure you guys register before August 5th because it's an early bird discount. It will be a lot of fun, inshallah. We also have our food pantry that's going to be held at Masjid al-Dawa on August 5th as well. Along with our Friday breakfast every week that Abdul Rahman and Brother Muhammad Haq host, and they talk about the prophetic interactions that the Prophet ﷺ had with his people and how we also implement it into our lives, inshallah. We also have our Sisters Halaqa every Saturday, but for the summer, we actually have replaced it with some of the youth events that we have planned, such as the Sisters Beach Day on August 12th, as well as our youth potluck on August 5th. So please make sure you register for those events as well. Along with our Brothers Jiu-Jitsu, which is on every Tuesday and every 8 p.m. here in this center. So if you'd like to register for any of those events, please reach out to any of the board members here, or feel free to go on our social media account.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Shafaya, for those updates. And to stay updated, you can scan this barcode. It will guide you to all of our socials. And to introduce now Imam Tom Fakini. He is a revert to Islam in 2010, and he finished his bachelor's in political science from Vassar College in 2011, and he studied in the Islamic University of Medina from 2015 to 2020, where he obtained his bachelor's from the Faculty of Sharia. Currently, Imam Tom is the Research Director of Islamic Society at the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, and he's also a resident scholar of Utica Masjid in New York, as well as the Imam of Hamilton College, where he does his chaplaincy work, and he also teaches tafsir to middle schoolers online through the Legacy International High School. And inshallah, without further ado, Imam Tom Fakini. And just before we start, inshallah, if anyone has any questions, you can scan this barcode on your phone, and you can submit questions, and you can do so anonymously if you don't want to raise your hand at the end of the lecture.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi. First of all, if anybody knows how to turn it down the reverb on this mic, I'm not reciting Quran. Thank you very much for inviting me. I love Mass. I love Mass Queens and Mass Brooklyn and the whole concept of youth-centered da'wah and youth-centered life. A lot of masajid organizations talk about youth empowerment, but very, very few are willing to actually be crazy enough to turn over the keys to see what youth empowerment really looks like. And Mass does that. And so that gives sort of authenticity and an edge to what you do. And it's really, really cool to see. I'm always happy to come down. It's just a 4-hour drive from Utica. Whenever we're in the neighborhood, we love to come through. So tonight to talk about this, it's a very hot topic. We're talking about the people of Lut, and obviously that bears some resemblance, though it's not completely identical to the issues that we face today. But it provides a good sort of springboard to jump off and to talk about it. I was forwarded a set of questions that kind of chopped them up and rearranged them, and so I'm going to take us through sort of looking at some of the verses that our brother just recited for us a second ago. The problem of Lut's people, right? This is sort of a paradigmatic story. Okay, you come to the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells a story, and He teaches through stories. And there's a selectivity in that process, obviously, because it's only 604 pages. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't tell us every single story that ever existed. That would be, kind of difficult for us. He chose certain stories to put in there, and He chose to exclude others. And so you have to take very seriously the stories that He chose to put in there. They're historically true, yeah, but they're also larger than life, meaning that they have continuous relevance as time goes on. They present certain types or certain sort of paradigms or certain sort of archetypes that keep on happening over and over again in history. And so the story of Lut alayhi salam and his people, it's not 100% analogous to what we're going through today. In fact, some of what we're going through today is actually much, much worse, and we'll talk about that. But it does give us, again, that background, a place from which we can begin talking about issues of gender, issues of sexuality, issues of desire, and everything else that surrounds them. So, we'll start with talking about the people of Lut, alayhi salam. And particularly, the question that was posed to me was, how did they collectively get to the point where it was men that were trying to pursue other men for their sexual desire, their sexual pleasure? And I like the way that the question was put to me, because one word, or one key word was put in that question, and that was collectively. Collectively, because this is going to frame the whole discussion today. If you look on an individual level, right, anybody can be given a series of tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? For some people are tested with, with infidelity. Other people are tested with kibr, tested with arrogance. Other people are tested with showing off. Other people are tested with laziness. Like every single one of us has been given tests by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some people have been tested with this thing of sexual attraction or sexual desire towards the same sex. So if we're looking at things when it comes to the individual level, well, that's when I, as an imam, put my pastoral hat on and I try to tend to that person and say, you're somebody who is struggling, and how are we going to approach this together, and how are we going to, put you on a path where you're both obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you're also taking very seriously and very real the issues that you have been dealt, or the hand that you've been dealt. But the person who gave me this question, they put that word in there collectively. And that gives it a whole new valence. And what I mean by that is that if you look at society today, you know that Gen Z, okay, some estimates, some data says that 1 out of 5, it's 20%, 1 out of 5 people your age identify as something that is gender dysphoric, whether it's, that they use they, them pronouns, or whether it's that they don't feel like they're exactly the same gender as the body that Allah has given them, etc., etc., etc. This is an enormous, we're talking exponential explosion of people who are reporting this type of issue compared to even my generation. I'm a millennial, full disclosure, let alone the people before me, right? So can we explain this phenomenon just by, this is just what individuals are going through, or this is just something that's in the water, or the chemicals that are in the air, or whatever? They might have a role. They might have a role, but there's something else going on. Something that some social commentators and critics have called social contagion. Okay, is that there is a dimension to this thing that has an ideological element to it. An ideological element that is pushed on us in media, in movies, and in film, and in TV, and in schools, and in other sort of venues. So we're going to look at that. If you came here today hoping for sort of a more pastoral talk about you're an individual that's dealing with these things on an individual level, I'm just going to be very honest with you. This talk is not for you, right? If you have these issues, then you can approach them individually, or somebody else is probably more qualified to deal with these things individually to get the sort of pastoral attention that you need. But I'm talking about society today. I'm talking about where we're at as a country. I'm talking about where we're at, and all of the forces that are kind of pushing on us from outside that actually have effects, real consequences on how we experience life and how we experience even something so intimate as our sexual desire. One thing I want to lead into, so how can we account for this social contagion? How do we get from 1% or less than 1%, we're talking fewer people than there are Muslims in the United States of America, okay, who are either identifying in some sort of sexual identity that's attracted to the same sex, or, thank you, may Allah bless you. Oh, may Allah bless you. I felt like I was like the voice from beyond or something like that. Thank you, I knew we could do it. Just take a second, enjoy that. All right. How do we get from one place to another? All right. We weren't here before. We had an exponential explosion. The key thing to understand, and it's going to be sort of a heresy compared to some of the things that were taught today, is that what you believe in actually matters. Surprise, surprise. When it comes to shaping how you experience life and the decisions that you make and how you experience the world around you. Why do I call that a social heresy compared to today? Because you and I were both brought up in a society, if you were brought up in the United States of America, that told us time and time and time again, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're a good person. How many times have we heard this mantra? And yet this thing is the furthest from the truth. Actually, what you believe in matters everything. It's probably the most significant, matterful thing when it comes to shaping your capacity for the things that you're going to do, the things that you think to say, even how you experience and feel emotionally the life that you live. Beliefs shape capacity for action. If you want a demonstration about why this is true, okay, just consider this. If you're somebody who believes that there's an afterlife, okay, you believe that when you die, you're going to go somewhere. There's going to be some sort of eternal consequences, one way or another, good or bad, for what you do. How is that going to affect your life on this earth? How is it going to affect how you approach your daily routine? How is it going to affect what happens when you get cut off in New York City traffic in Queens, which happens every single second of every single day that you're here, right? You might want to unload on the person. You might want to, shoot him the bird or do worse than that if you're one of the guys, right? And you just come out of the gym, you got that testosterone pumping. But what's going to stop you? You believe in the afterlife. You believe that there's eternal consequences. You believe that there's a perfect God who can hold you account to those eternal consequences, rather than the imperfect and infallible cop that's checking his phone when you're speeding by him on the freeway. Right? So that belief has a very, very consequential influence on what you're going to choose to do. Okay, now compare that to somebody who doesn't believe in the afterlife. Somebody who thinks that we're just a sack of cells, we're just atoms, we're dead matter, that there is no sort of afterlife, there is no God, there is no eternal consequences. Well, guess what? If it comes to you and me, it's going to be me. I'm going to choose me every time, right? I don't care about what's going to happen to you. I don't care about... You see how what we believe in actually does influence our ability to act, or our inability to act. That's why when you look at people of faith, you go back, if anybody's really curious about this, you can read some of the literature of the Holocaust and people who went through the Holocaust, right? People who went to concentration camps. The people who fared the best were the people who believed in God. The people who kept on acting on principle, who didn't cave in to just like acting like animals, were the people who believed in God. Because everybody can say, well, it doesn't matter what you believe. Well, if you have your belly full and I have my belly full, and we both have jobs and money and Netflix, then it's cool. And we can maybe get along. But what happens when war breaks out? What happens when famine breaks out? What happens when these sorts of things happen? Then the only people who do righteous deeds are the people of belief, the people who believe in something greater than themselves. If I only believe in myself, then I'm going to take care of me more than I'm going to take care of you. People used to understand this. Okay, if you rewind like 100, 200 years in the English language, people use the word atheist in a very different sense than we use it today. Today we use the word atheist, and we're talking about somebody who doesn't believe in things, or who believes that there is no God. It's kind of like a set of propositions that the person believes in. Rewind 100, 200 years, people use an atheist to describe an immoral person. They say this person's an atheist. It means not just talking about what they believe in or what they don't believe in, but their whole approach to morality. This person's like an immoral person. You can't trust them. They're not someone that you would depend upon, right? Now, we have a language for this, and it's fallen out of use. We used to talk about fidelity and infidelity, and that's where the term infidel came from. Because the idea that you could actually be in a universe, in a world that was so amazingly, stupendously fantastic, with foods and colors and flavors and friends and talents and fun stuff, and still disbelieve in the God that put it all there, that was considered such an act of ingratitude that people used to refer to it as infidelity. But we've come a long way since that. Whereas people now are only talking about, do you believe in something or do you not believe in something? And that is something where now we talk about atheists and it has a very, very different meaning. What's the point of all this? The point of all this is to say that what you believe in matters everything. Whether you believe in an eternal God, a perfect God, eternal life after death or not, is literally going to shape your possibilities, your horizons, what you can feel, what you can think, and what you're going to do. And so we come today to the point that we're at, where we have elementary school teachers that are targeting kids and asking them, what's your gender? Do you feel like a boy today? Do you feel like a girl today? Right? Or all the other sort of nonsense that we see. And we say, how do we get so far? How do we come to this place? We came to this place because of what we're submitting to. Okay? That's my thesis. What are we submitting to? For us as Muslims, our main thing, if you're going to distill it to a single sentence, is that we believe in submitting to the Creator. That's it. Whereas the rest of society is telling us something very, very different. They're not telling us to not submit. No, that would be better. They're telling us to submit to something else. They're telling us to submit to your desires. Submit to what you want. Whatever you want to do, then that's what you should do. And all it takes is a Disney movie or two to realize that this is what society has been pumping you with since the time that you were a little girl or a little boy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this phenomenon. Again, Allah talks about archetypes. He talks about stories. And those stories keep recurring and recurring and recurring throughout history. And so Allah actually discusses this. He says in the Quran, أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. He says, have you seen or considered the person that would take their own desires, what they want to do, as if it was a God? Okay, remember that worship is more than just praying and fasting. Worship means obedience. So you have to ask yourself at the end of the day, what are you obeying? Are you obeying the Creator of the heavens and the earth, the person who gave you your wonderful self? Or are you obeying sort of whatever sort of occurs to you in the moment? Well, I want to do this, or I want to do that. Or I feel like this, or I feel like that. Which one are you obeying and which one are you submitting to? That's what it's supposed to get us to think about. Now at this point, we have another question. What's the nature of this sort of want? You want something, okay? Whether it's a job, whether it's a car, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a certain lifestyle, okay? Let's get a real cute example, okay? Yesterday was hot, right? Was yesterday hot? Yesterday was really, really hot, okay? What do you want when it's hot outside? Water, shade, ice cream maybe? Ice cream sounds good, right? Let's go with ice cream for a second. Okay, it's super hot, like super. You want ice cream. It's not, yes. It's nothing wrong with that. You can want ice cream, I love ice cream, okay? But now we have a decision to make, okay? Are we going to get the ice cream or we're not going to get the ice cream? This is actually a philosophy experiment. What you choose is actually going to have a consequence on how desire functions. Let's put it another way. It will reveal what you think about desire. Is choosing to have ice cream on a hot day, is it something that's going to satisfy that desire? Or is it something that's going to make that desire stronger in the future? You can make an argument for both, right? But there's definitely a component. If we're going to talk about society or Islam versus modern society is only telling you, if you feel like you want to have ice cream, then baby, you better go get ice cream. That the only way to fulfill your desire is to satisfy it, is to go out and do it. And if you don't, you're going to live in so much internal anguish and cognitive dissonance that you might just one day kill yourself. Right? That's what society tells us. That's not the only way to deal with desire. There's another way to perceive desire. And that is that every time you choose to act on a desire, you actually make it a little bit stronger. Okay? It was, what was it yesterday? 100 and something? What was the temperature? 90 something? Okay, it's in the 90s. Let's say tomorrow it's 105. Alright? Yesterday you chose to get ice cream. Tomorrow's 105. How likely are you to go out and get ice cream tomorrow? Are you more likely or less likely since you went out and got ice cream yesterday? You're more likely, right? So this is something that Aristotle called habitus. It means that when you choose something, it actually kind of paves a pathway. Like if you guys are in the neuroscience, it's like a neural pathway. And so it makes it more likely that you're going to choose that thing in the future. Okay? This is another way to think about desire and how desire operates. Why are we getting into this? Because desire is not some sort of sacred thing. Okay? That God just gave you your desires and your desires are sacred and now you have to act on your desires or else you're going to be a miserable person. Desires are plastic. Desires can be shaped. Desires can be pushed this way and pushed that way. They can be strengthened. They can be weakened, right? It's not something that's absolutely essential to who you are. Basically, if you want to sum up traditional pre-modern wisdom of every single civilization, religion, and place, they say that you are not your desires. Or let's say you are more than your desires. You're not dealt a death sentence or you're not doomed to only be your desires. If you happen to desire something, then you have the choice whether you're going to engage with that thing or not. Whether you're going to choose to go down that path and maybe make it a little stronger, or whether you're going to choose another way and go in a different direction entirely. We see the relevance of this today because society is telling us that we can't live if you have a sexual attraction to somebody of the same sex as you. To not act on that desire is basically just a betrayal of your autonomous and authentic self. The worst thing that you could do. You're going to live in this horrible sort of conflicted nature to the point where Allah knows what's going to happen to you. Right? It's based on a certain type of logic and a certain type of understanding of what desire is. Islam and every other faith tradition out there says, no, hey, wait a second. We can look at desire in a completely different way. We actually want to have a critical engagement with our desires. We're not willing to be doomed to the things, the desires that come up every day. If I find myself, if somebody finds themselves attracted to the same-sex person, that doesn't mean that that's a life sentence. That doesn't mean that this thing is an essential part of who I am. It doesn't mean that this thing can't be shed or shifted or molded or pushed. It actually can, but it depends upon our beliefs. Pivoting for a second. So we have this archetype story, okay, the people of Lut, alayhi salam, and what they were doing and what they were on. Let's look at the Quran for a second, some of the ayat that the brother recited, Allah reward him, and let's look real carefully, close reading, to see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described this people and described this sin. Before we get into downstream stuff like gender ideology and this sort of thing, we're going to talk just about what has been termed homosexuality, even though that's not a perfect term for it, right? Same-sex attraction, I think, is a better term. Even better, acting on your same-sex attractions, which is what obviously was the cardinal sin of the people of Lut. One of the characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to describe this group of people and this particular sin, the first thing that he says is that this particular sin that they did, it was unprecedented and unnatural. Meaning literally, nobody did it before them. He says, وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. This thing that you're doing, that nobody has done before. Okay? It's no coincidence that the LGBTQ lobby and the gender sort of ideology has really, really worked hard to try to find examples in the past of traditional indigenous people that had same-sex attractions or whatever in order to justify themselves on this account, to make it seem natural, to make it seem like it's just a normal part of human culture and physiology. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us straight up, this is something that was unprecedented, something that had never literally happened before. That before the people of Lut alayhi salam, this thing didn't exist, there wasn't even a name for it. And so they were the first ones to go down this path, and it was unnatural. And we'll get to why it was unnatural in a little bit, actually next. The second thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala characterizes this sin as is wasteful. Wasteful. He says, the words of Lut alayhi salam, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالِ شَهْوَةً مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. You are a people who waste. What's the waste here?
Life.
Huh?
Life.
Life? How?
Because Allah created them and they're doing that with it.
Okay. I thought you were going deeper than that, but yeah. There's a different way that life is wasted. Life is literally wasted. What comes? Okay. Is everybody mature enough here to talk about this?
It's supposed to be male and female. So like if they're doing that, they're going backwards.
Okay. Yes. Reproductive capacity. Thank you. Life. That's life literally. Quite literally. Okay? Reproductive capacity is ending up in the wrong place. Okay? This is waste. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this thing here for a reason. It's not rocket science. You've got a nut, you've got the bolt, the things go together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created these two things that go together. He created the institution of marriage. He created all of this for the reproduction of the human species, for the continuation of the human species. So you guys are going to do what now? You're going to take this thing and you're going to put it to use. How? Complete waste. Complete waste. It's like, for example, let's imagine mass like gets really rich. May Allah make mass really rich. Seriously, money, like you're swimming in money, like a pool of money. You can open 100 youth centers all across the city. Okay? And so little Miskeen Imam Tom comes into town and you're like, let's give him a little something, like let's throw him a Rolex or something, or a car, because you're that, just like, you got that much money. Okay, let's say you give me like a Tesla or something. Just saying. Imagine I took that gift, okay, and imagine instead of using that gift in the way that it was designed to be used, which is what? Driving, right, transportation, I don't know. I go in and roll in like a demolition derby with the Tesla that you gave me. I got some nice spray paint, and I like make it look real mean, put like, fangs on the front or something, and I just like destroyed it. How would you feel as Max? Like you just gave me this gift, and I literally just trashed it. That would be a sign of ingratitude for me, correct? Correct. That would be a sign of ingratitude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, we literally call them in biology class, reproductive organs. What are reproductive organs good for? Reproducing. Yes. If you're using them in a way that is against reproduction or the reproductive capacity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended, you're wasting it. You're wasting it. Just really, really simple black and white. It's like mathematics. Like I don't know how, okay, that's another story. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dead correct when he says, musrifun, that you guys are wasteful. There's something, this capacity. Allah talks about the marriage bond and how you're supposed to complete one another, male and female. You're supposed to find sakina in one another. All the things that we recite during the nikahs, right? All the beautiful ayat, half our deen, right? The things from the hadith. And you're going to waste it. how ungrateful. This is a characteristic of this, or something very characteristic to this sin. The next thing, it gets better, it gets more interesting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this sin and the people who are caught up in this sin as people who are intolerant. Oh yeah, intolerant. And hates purity. وَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ قَرْيَتِكُمْ إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ. Their only response when Lut alayhi salam brought them facts, brought them biology, brought them, revelation from on high, what was their only response? The only response was get him out of here. Kick him out. Get rid of this guy. And then they say something interesting. They're people who are pure. So look at, first of all, how corrupt they've become. That what's dirty becomes good to them, and what's good to them becomes dirty. But second, look at how they're intolerant. They can't handle to be challenged. And haven't we reached that point in our society where if you try to stand up and if you try to challenge this, people then say, you're a bigot, get him out of here, dox him, cancel him, put him off of this platform. Dave Chappelle, even Dave Chappelle, get him off of Netflix, right? This is exactly what Allah told us. And the irony, why we find it ironic, is because when this group of people were put, when they were in a position of oppression or marginalization, the way that they drummed up sympathy for themselves was by preaching tolerance. All we want to do is be tolerated. We just want tolerance. And then once they get a little bit of power, we see the reality of it. Just like Lut alayhi salam saw the reality of it, it was never about tolerance. It was about a power grab and then trying to marginalize and oppress everybody else. And there's other ayats that reify the same thing. Next thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to characterize this group of people who have, it's not just fallen into the sin, as we're going to see in a second, it's dedicated to the sin, taken the sin as their deen, bought in and invested their selfhood in this sin, is that the people who support them and enable them are also guilty. And that's kind of scary. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَنْجَيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ إِلَّا امْرَأَتْهُ كَانَتْ مِنَ الْغَابِرِينَ, or the ayat that the brother just recited. And then in another ayat, another surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَامْرَأَةَ نُوحٍ وَامْرَأَةَ لُوطٍ كَانَتَا تَحْتَ عَبْدَيْنِ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا صَالِحَيْنِ فَخَانَتَاهُمَا. They betrayed. So he's talking specifically about the wife of Lut alayhi salam. And that even though Lut alayhi salam was preaching the truth and was trying to guide his people out of his goodwill and his love for them, we'll see that in a second, what was his wife's position? His wife was an enabler. His wife was an ally. His wife was someone that was trying to carve out space for them to do what they were doing. And then what happened? When it was time for the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to come down, she was swept up in the punishment just along with the people who were doing it. Scary? Scary. Now we're not talking about people who made some sort of political calculation or miscalculation and thought that whatever. We're talking about people who believe that they have the right to be doing what they're doing. That's a different thing, right? A political miscalculation versus a theological error. Somebody who believes that they should have the right. They should have the right to do what they want to do in the bedroom. What does that have to do with me? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you right here what it has to do with you. That if this were a different scenario, who are you in the story? That's why Allah talks in archetypes. Yes, it's historically true, but it's also an archetype. Find yourself in the story. Who are you in the story? Hopefully we're on the side of Lut alayhi salam. Hopefully we're not on the side of his wife. Hopefully for darn sure we're not on the side of the people that Lut alayhi salam is trying to stop. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he also, the next thing, he characterizes them as people who deserve punishment. We're going to pay attention real close to why they deserve punishment. We're talking about the people who not just did an action and not just did a sin, but they took that sin as their manhaj, as their method, as their lifestyle, as their aqidah, as their deen. That this is my way and nobody else can tell me what to do. That's none of your business. وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَطَرًا فَانْظُرْ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Allah calls them criminals. Why? إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً وَمَا كَانَ أَكْثَرُهُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. The ayah that the brother recited for us. Because they didn't believe. It wasn't necessarily because of their sin. Every single one of us sins. This sin, honestly, and this is something that other people have brought up and it's correct, it's not as bad as shirk. It's not. Shirk is the worst sin. To worship something else besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the worst thing that you could possibly do. So even no matter how heinous this crime is, it doesn't reach that level. However, if somebody becomes dedicated, somebody tries to justify a sin, there's a big difference between somebody who says, listen, I struggle with this and I do it, but I know it's wrong and I hope that Allah guides me, versus somebody who says, no, this is what I'm doing and I don't care what Allah says about it. Two very, very different things. The second group of people were the people of Lut alayhi salam. They were so committed to their desires. They were so invested in their desires. They believed that their desires were who they were. Sounds familiar. And so it ended up being very, very bad for them. That's a brief summary of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala characterizes this group of people and the particular thing that they were involved in. Let's check the other side. How was the reaction of Lut alayhi salam to them? Okay? If we're talking about archetypes, if this is something that repeats and we find ourselves in a similar or different situation as Lut, then we better pay attention to how we handle it, right? What is his orientation towards them, no pun intended? What is his sort of way that he's going to deal with them? We find some really important lessons. The first thing that you notice from Lut alayhi salam is that everything that he does is based off of sincerity and goodwill. He loves his people, and part of loving his people is that he wants them to be guided and he wants their success in the afterlife. And this is a terrible irony, because you have people these days, Muslims like you and me, wear a kufi, wear a hijab or whatever, but when it comes to this issue, we'll say, well, I just want them to be happy. I want them to be able to do what's going to fulfill them. I want them to be able to follow their heart. I want them to be able to be fulfilled. As if you're doing that person a favor. You're not doing that person a favor. You're not showing that you're loyal to this person. Because if you really cared about this person, if you were really loyal to this person and had goodwill for them and wanted the best for them, you wouldn't just care for the couple of decades that they were here on earth. You would also care about their afterlife and what's going to happen to them after as well. That's real loyalty. So Lut alayhi salam is completely loyal to his people, and so he has complete goodwill. He wants them to be guided. He doesn't take any sort of intellectual wages from being right and they're wrong. He's gripped in discomfort and sort of awkwardness and exasperation and frustration that they're not responding to his message and his argumentation. And we see this, is that he's anguished. That's the word I was looking for. He's anguished by what his people are going through and what his people have fallen into. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَمَّا جَاءَتْ رُسُلُنَا لُوطًا سِيءَ بِهِمْ وَضَاقَ بِهِمْ ذَرْعًا وَقَالَ هَذَا يَوْمٌ عَسِيرٌ. He was tormented on the inside because of what his people had fallen into. And that's the sign of sincerity. And that's the sign of goodwill. And in other places, Lut alayhi salam, he stresses his sincerity to them. He actually tries to demonstrate it and to prove it to them so that they know that he's not trying to just be a jerk and stop them from having a good time. He says, إِنِّي لَكُمْ رَسُولٌ أَمِينٌ وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ إِنْ أَجْرِي إِلَّا عَلَىٰ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. He said, listen, I am just a trustworthy messenger that's sent to you. And I'm not asking you for anything. I don't want money from you. I don't want fame. I don't want power. I don't want status. My reward only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's somebody who's sincere. Not somebody who deserves to be trusted. So if you want to do da'wah, or if you want to interact with anybody in your community, whether they're a Muslim or not, or if they're a Muslim that's struggling in these sorts of things, don't think that you're going to get anywhere not adopting Lut's sincerity or his goodwill towards his people. The very, very, very first thing you need to have is sincerity and goodwill. Don't get yourself up on a high horse thinking that you're some pious person and you're some sort of righteous person and this person is nothing. That's toxic. And it's only going to ruin you. And who knows what's going to happen on the day of judgment. You have to come just like the prophets came from a position of sincerity and goodwill. That the only thing that's motivating you in your actions and your statements is the fact that you want what's best for this person in this life and the next. If you start from that level of sincerity, then you're going to take every single reasonable mean and tactic and strategy to make sure that the things that you say and the things that you do are going to be received well. Right? So if Lut alayhi salam is completely loyal to his people and he wants their success, he's going to think super hard about his strategy and how he's going to try to maximize the likelihood, give them any sort of fighting chance to come back to the truth. He's not going to be just like, yo, I told y'all and y'all done for, see you later, bye, I'm out. That's not the way. He's going to try and try and try, and he's going to shift tactics, and you're going to see that it's a demonstration of his loyalty and sincerity. The first thing that he does is he tries to appeal to their sense of taqwa, their sense of righteousness, their commonality, the recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord of all the worlds. He says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُونَ. Be conscious of Allah. Yes, even in your sexual proclivities, your sexual activities, your sexual desires. Be conscious of Allah, even in that, and obey Him. Okay? This isn't out of bounds. Everything has to be according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. The next, that didn't work, obviously. They were overcome with their desire, to the point where they didn't want to hear it. Remember their response, just get out of here or we're going to kick you out. So the next tactic that Lut alayhi salam uses, he tries to reason with them. He tries, okay, you're not going to go with righteousness and piety. Let's try to reason with you. And so, Lut alayhi salam, he says, أَتَتُونَ الذُّكْرَانِ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ وَاتَّذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. He says, this is the ayah, one of the ayahs that was recited, are you guys going to approach men among the creation and leave that which was created for you, your spouses, your wives? He's trying to reason with them. It doesn't make any sense. Who did Allah create for you? We're going back to reproductive organs, right? Who did Allah put here for you? Are you going to abandon them to go after people of the same sex as you? He's trying to respond to their reason. And we have a parallel sort of tactic that we can go here with evolutionary biology, right? If you talk to even atheists, people who are atheists should be sympathetic, or people who believe in evolution should be very sympathetic. Guess what? If you want to take homosexual sort of activity and behavior and apply it to all society, evolution is done for, and we are done for as a species. This is an anti-evolutionary activity, right? So that's the sort of second sort of maneuver, or the sort of tactic that Lut alayhi salam is trying to appeal to. He's trying to appeal to their reason because they wouldn't listen to a theological discussion or sort of channeling their fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last thing that he tries with them before he kind of gives up, but doesn't really give up, but we'll see, is he tries to plead with them and he tries to divert them to something else. And this is from hikmah, this is from wisdom. Sometimes when it comes to people that are wrapped up in sin, it's best to just lead them one step away from it, if you can't lead them more than that. To give them something else to do instead, right? It's the lesser of two evils, right? We hear that a lot. But look at how Lut alayhi salam, he went through a certain sort of protocol. Now he's at the last straw, and the last straw is lesser of two evils. And so he says to them, وَجَاءَهُ قَوْمُهُ يُهْرَعُونَ إِلَيْهِ وَمِنْ قَبْلُ كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ هَؤُلَاءِ بَنَاتِي هُنَّ أَطْهَرُ لَكُمْ. He says, here's my daughters. That's kind of crazy, right? But look at how he's pushed, and look at how it comes from his sincerity and his goodwill. He's tried everything. He's trying to be like, fear Allah, respond to Allah. Okay, that didn't work. All right, what about your reason? What about, think about it, logic, whatever. It didn't work. It's like, take my daughters. Anything to try to give these people a way out from sinning and going down the path that they're going. But what was their response? We see again and again and again that they're not having it. Why aren't they having it? Is it because that they're simply overcome by the desire? No, it's much deeper than that with the people of Lut alayhi salam. What it is that they are dedicated to it as an aqidah. They're dedicated to the thought of following their desires, that their desires are their God, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us about. And so after trying to appeal to their God consciousness, after trying to appeal to their reason, after trying to appeal to even just any diversionary tactic and whatever, now we come to the stage of al-wala wal-bara. Now we come to the stage where Lut alayhi salam, he disavows and he distances himself. Look at how loyal he was. You and I would have given up long before Lut alayhi salam did. But he stuck with it until the very end, until it was completely hopeless. And then at that point he says, قَالَ إِنِّي لِأَعْمَلِكُمْ مِنَ الْقَالِينَ. I despise your actions. Look at that. Another lesson. He didn't say you as a human being, all of you. He said, I despise your actions, what you're doing. This thing is completely wrong. And after that, the next thing that Lut alayhi salam does, after he disavows and sort of he distances himself, the weapon of the believers, he makes dua. He asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to intervene. رَبِّ نَجِّنِي وَأَهْلِي مِمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ قَالَ رَبِّ انصُرْنِي عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. And we see that his dua is answered, and soon that he is granted the assistance that he's asking for. There's one other thing that Lut alayhi salam tries, one thing that he asked for, and this is going to be super important to the very, very end of this talk. In addition to asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to sort of deal with it, Lut makes a passing comment, and it's something that's very instructive to us. He says, قَالَ لَوْ أَنَّ لِي بِكُمْ قُوَّةً أَوْ آوِي إِلَىٰ رُكْنٍ شَدِيدٍ. If only I had some power over you, or I could lean on some sort of pillar. Talking about capacity, talking about some sort of ability to structure society. We're talking about some sort of ability to influence. Lut alayhi salam, he was actually expressing regret that he didn't have this power, he didn't have this ability over them. And so he was resigned to making dua and to letting the angels take care of what they were going to take care of. Time to re-emphasize. What was it that stopped the people of Lut alayhi salam from taking this guidance? I mean, if you look at it, it was very generous. Lut alayhi salam literally tried everything. I don't think a single one of us could blame Lut alayhi salam for giving up too soon. He tried to appeal to their God consciousness. That didn't work. He tried to appeal to their reason. That didn't work. He tried to give them an alternative, even leaving behind all the messed up sort of beliefs that they had. That didn't work. He made dua. He expressed regret. Maybe he was even blaming himself a little bit for not having established authority or control over the society. That's all of what he went to. But what was it that stopped his people from getting the message and following him? It was their disposition of gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we call that kufr. It's not simply a sin. It's taking that sin as, this is my religion. This is what I'm following. I would rather follow the things that I want to do than follow the revelation and the guidance from my Creator. And that's a very, very, very dangerous place to be in. For the remainder of the talk, we're going to now try to transition and pivot once more to talking about today and the situation that we find ourselves in presently. Can this happen to us? Was the question that was posed to me today, where a whole lot or many of the newer generation becomes quote-unquote sexually deviant. I've already answered that. The question is, oh yeah, you betcha, as they say in the Midwest. And we've already seen it, to be honest. Again, look at the numbers. We have people who are now, we have 1 out of 5 Gen Zers identifying with gender dysphoria in some way or shape or fashion, saying that either they're not sure what gender they belong to, or they're not sure that their gender corresponds to biological sex, and many, many, many other permutations beyond that. And that's where we see that this thing is a little bit different from what Lut alayhi salam faced and what the people of Lut alayhi salam were doing. The sin of Lut's people was fairly simple and quaint in comparison to what we find today. Because their sin was, I'm attracted to this type of person of the same sex as I am, and by darn it, I'm going to do it, and no one's going to stop me. Okay? That's a lot different from putting into doubt the very idea of gender, the very idea of sex. You've got people trying to push now to the point where they're saying that some of the books that they're pushing in elementary school is saying that at the time of birth, doctors, they just take their best guess as to what your gender is. This is something that's much more dangerous, in my estimation, than the thing that the people of Lut alayhi salam were caught up with. How do we get here? Why is ours worse than theirs? What are the sort of different complicating factors that have led us to where we are? Well, we exist in a time where our entire culture has been hyper-sexualized. If you're on Instagram, I don't need to say another word. Okay? I don't care how clean your search history is or how clean your viewing history is. Once you upload something, the algorithm's going to throw you something. They're going to throw you something. And they're going to try to tempt you towards it. Something that, as we say, sex sells. Right? And so we live in this kind of paradox where you go out on the street, it's kind of rough. The things that people wear these days, it's a very similar thing. Sex and sexualized existence is everywhere. Everybody is trying to tell you, subliminally, not necessarily explicitly, but subliminally, that your worth, especially the ladies, sorry, but you know that they're targeting you more than they are us, that your worth is tied up to how much sex appeal you have. That's what society teaches you. And unfortunately, it has tremendous, tremendous, tremendous effects. Now within that hypersexualized space, where now everybody is sort of evaluating themselves. You know how like Forbes 500 talks about like, what's your net worth? Well, on the the school playground, your net worth is your sex appeal. And now you've got society and your sort of surroundings that are sort of evaluating you or putting this value on you according to your sex appeal. What happens if you don't match up to the standard that they set up? What if you don't have puffy lips and a big booty and whatever that they're telling you is supposed to contribute to your sex appeal today? This is mature audience only discussion, by the way. Sorry, I can't answer it. What's going to happen is you're going to start to question yourself. You're going to start to question yourself. Maybe I'm not as much of a woman. Maybe I'm not as much of a man. I don't have the full beard. I don't have the big rippling biceps. I don't have, the chiseled six-pack. And it happens to guys too. It happens to guys too, but unfortunately the ladies are much more targeted than the men. But it happens to the guys too. And so what happens is, back when I was growing up, if you weren't sleeping around, they used to say, what are you, gay? Well now, if you're not doing these sorts of things to sort of increase your sex appeal or flaunt what you have, now the message is, well, maybe you're not really a girl at all. Maybe you're really a boy. Maybe you've got gender dysphoria. Maybe you're really somewhere in between. Maybe there's a new gender, one of the 172 genders that are recognized out there, that you need to identify yourself with now. You don't fit up to this hypersexualized ideal. That's one ingredient among many. Another ingredient is this idea of moral autonomy. Autonomy is the idea that you derive your value and satisfaction in life from doing what you want to do. Right? We talked about this in the beginning. That the idea is you are your desires. So if you want to do something, and anybody's telling you to not do it, they're toxic, they're oppressive, get them out of here, patriarchy, whatever, because they're assuming that you are your desires. And if you don't act on your desires, then you're just in for a whole lot of trouble and frustration. Isolation, individualism also plays a big role. We're more fractured as a society than perhaps at any point in the past. It's crazy to think that you can have thousands of followers on the gram and not have a single good friend to talk to or rely on in your time of need. Nobody that's really going to go to bat for you no matter what they say. That's where we're at in this moment in society. And so, they say that the wolf goes after the lone sheep. Okay? If you have a strong support network, you've got friends that are ride or die, you've got good family around you, good influences, you're going to be more resilient to these pressures that society's putting on you. If you don't have any close friends, or most of your friends are they're fakes, they're phonies, they're not real friends. Your family's kind of torn apart. You feel very isolated and very alone. You're going to be much, much more susceptible to this type of thinking, questioning your value, questioning your gender, questioning whether you really match up and belong. Part of that is a loss of purpose. We have the real pandemic wasn't COVID, it was the loss of purpose that we have in society. And nobody knows what the heck we're here for or what we're doing. And part of that, we can put blame in a lot of different directions for that. We don't have to go into that all here. But we've lost the plot. We're getting too distracted by the side quests of life. We need to keep in mind that the real reason that we're here is the afterlife. This is the talk I gave in Brooklyn last night. That the real reason you're here is to die. Sorry. It's to die. But it's to die well. It's to die right. And everything else is just frosting on top of the cake. And the last thing is that we have a machine of indoctrination unlike anything anybody could have dreamed of. If Fir'aun had the weapons of indoctrination that they have in American society, boy, man, he'd be like that guy in a purple suit behind a tree and he rub his hands together. Right? The centralization of schools, the curriculum, the boards of curriculum. You've got the American Psychiatrist and Pediatric Academy with their latest standards and protocols, and everybody's completely captured on this new gender ideology. And they see dollar signs just like Scrooge McDuck. Because guess what? If you go on with gender reassignment surgery, they take away your one reproductive organ and try to give you another. They just found a lifelong patient. So we are in a position, unfortunately, that is much worse than the position that Lut alayhi salam found himself in. In my humble opinion, I could be wrong. But the way I see it, it's a lot more deep than what Lut alayhi salam faced. So how are we going to protect ourselves? What are we going to do? Two things only. because of big things. Okay, the first thing, it comes back to recognizing who's your God at the end of the day. And this is the fitna of our time, right? Is your God Allah? Or is your God your desires? Is your God what you want to do? Is your God your sense of self? Who you think you are? Well, that's not who I am. I got to be true to myself. Follow my own truth. Live my best life. They're all slogans just to gas you up. And those people who are pumping up with these slogans, they're not going to help you on the day of judgment. Your real God is Allah. Your submission is due to Allah, not yourself, not what you want, not what you think is cool. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one, and He sent the messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for us to, bad word, conform to. Oh my God, conformity. Yeah, to conform to. We're supposed to conform to something. Whether it's Khadija or Aisha or Salama, or whether it's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam or the other companions, find somebody and conform yourself as best you can. That's the way to have success in this life and the next. And not to submit to either the pressures that are on you from outside or to these things that happen on the inside. You'll be surprised. Yo, as Imam, I hear everything. Okay? I hear everything. And you would be shocked at the things that some people are tested with. You think that calling your gender into question is bad? Bro, that is not even the beginning of what some people do. And yet, I've seen some people get through it. Maybe it took them 10 years. Maybe it took them 15 years. Maybe it took them 20 years. But they decided from the beginning, I'm not going to be defined by this thing. I am not my desires. Whether it's my sexual attraction, whether it's the kind of whatever I want to be or how I want to be seen or how I want to be perceived, that's not me. I'm someone else. I have a soul and it's soul first. If that's your decision, you're going to be okay. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. But eventually, it's going to be okay. That has to be the paradigm for every single one of us. That we have a paradigm of submission, and we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to not anything else. Remember, the Shahada starts with the negation. La ilaha. There's no God, nothing worth submitting to, nothing worth obeying, illallah, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why identity, on the side quest here, identity is not enough. The Muslim community, we got tied up in identity politics, especially how sort of politics happened, in the United States, where we started thinking, okay, everybody else is agitating and rallying and sort of coming together on identity. Well, we have a Muslim identity too. That's true. But being Muslim is much more than an identity. It's about being constituted by something. It's about having something on the inside, right? Don't only worry about how you identify, worry about being identifiable. You can identify as a Muslim all day long, but when you die and you go to the gates, are the angels going to recognize you? Are you identifiable as a Muslim or not? That's what really matters. And finally, that little statement of Lut alayhi salam, if only I had power. If only I had a rukn, something to lean against. This is America. We've got rights. We've got room to maneuver. We can still make mass youth centers. We can still make Islamic schools. We can still do a lot of stuff. We have a lot of liberties. We've got a lot of room to move. Okay? Is that guaranteed forever that we're going to have those rights? That's not guaranteed forever. 50 years from now, America could be like Sweden. They could be taking your kids away from you. It could happen, right? Canada's already on the path. It could happen. So, if Lut alayhi salam had a regret, when I was in Medina, I used to ask the older students. I was like the Hudayfa, right? Hudayfa, always would ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell me about the bad stuff. All the other companions would ask about the good stuff. Hudayfa's like, tell me about the bad stuff. When I was in Medina, I would talk to the older students, and I would ask them, don't tell me about what you've achieved or accomplished. Tell me about something that you regret. Because regrets are always more honest. Regrets are always more sober. And regrets are always more real. So take a lesson from the regret that Lut alayhi salam said, if only I had power. If only I had some sort of influence over them, someone that I could rely on, or something that I could rely on. We have the ability to build political power here, community building. You can elect people to the school board. You can elect people as mayor. You can elect people as city council. You can have judges. You can have people make laws. You have a lot of room to build power, maybe more room than in any other country. I don't know, maybe, to build power. as every single one of you comes to the point where you have to decide what you're going to do with your life. And I know your parents are pushing the Holy Trinity on you of doctor, lawyer, engineer. But if I could stump for something else, we need a whole lot more than that as a Muslim community. We need to look at how to build power as a Muslim community so that we can carve out a space so that we can resist both culturally, intellectually, and otherwise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Barakallahu feekum. I appreciate all of your attention tonight. I think we'll roll in questions. Barakallahu.
For anyone, if the Slido is not working, you can just put in the code as well if the barcode is not working.
First question, how do you go about working at a school that has LGBT plus in the curriculum? Do you still teach it? How do you stand your ground when it comes to this? This is still happening in the courts, all right? So this is not settled and set yet. And it's going to be really interesting to see what goes down. This is why we need Muslim lawyers. This is why we need Muslim, not even just lawyers, but lawmakers, people who are in think tanks. You guys know how like the LGBTQ lobby works, right? They actually they craft legislation and they work alongside with lawyers so that that legislation gets passed in as many states as possible. Why aren't we doing the same thing? Okay, very, very easy. We could be doing the same thing. So that's sort of like a high-level answer to the question. What do you do if you're a soldier on the ground? Man, I don't envy you, that's for sure. Some people have left in protest. Some people have done the bare minimum of what they can do. It's going to get to a point. I'll say this, strategically, politically, one of the most important things that determines this is who we have on the Supreme Court. What happens is people pass laws until they're not allowed to, right? There's what they call a test case, okay? So somebody does something and then makes such a big deal about it that eventually it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules on it, and then that sets the ball rolling, okay? And this is happening more and more. Now, at the current stage, we have a Supreme Court that is fairly sympathetic to religious rights. And so we need somebody who has financial support and backing to eventually take the bullet for the rest of us and to double down and say, I'm not going to teach this, this is against my religion in a public school, and then have the backing of Muslim lawyers behind them so that this thing can reach the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court can rule on it. When we believe that we have a chance at winning, that's the master strategy. You guys can reverse engineer it from there. If you're on the ground right now, I hesitate because I don't know the specifics of your situation. Obviously, is this just like a second income in the home? Can you afford to go down to one income? What are the options? These are all things I'm not going to, opine on, right? Everybody has to make a decision that they're comfortable with. But one thing that I was told by somebody who I look up to, they said that if you feel that you are put in a position to go against your principles and beliefs, then if you can't leave it immediately, then at least make some sort of exit strategy, right, so that you can eventually get to a better place. And this is something actually that I've practiced in my own life, and I've seen results. When I said, where do you draw the line between respecting people who identify as LGBTQ, as human beings, people, but at the same time not supporting their gender? Very, very easy. People make it seem hard. This is like the easiest thing in the world. They're a human being that deserves to eat and, not be beat up on the street or like killed by some sort of vigilante violence. That's like basic. The problem is that the LGBTQ lobby is trying to force us to celebrate and affirm their decision for their sexuality and their gender ideology, and saying that those things are all the same. And this, if you want to see any examples of this, go down to Montgomery County in Maryland, where this stuff is being fought right now in school boards, where they literally said that for Muslims to not celebrate LGBTQ people in their whole understanding of themselves is violence to them and equivalent to white supremacy. I kid you not. This is what people are saying. That don't fly. You have to push back against that. That is ridiculous. We got to cleave that in half. We respect people as human beings. We believe everybody should be safe in their homes. We don't think anybody should be, and if you checked, I have a podcast with the Akeem Institute called Dog Disrupted, and we talked about this with Dr. Sharif Adubli, where unfortunately, the history of the United States of America, we're now reacting to another excess that happened in the past, where unfortunately, People used to get beat up, and they used to get, oppressed in a really ugly, disgusting way. Stuff that the Sharia does not advocate at all. And so now you see the pushback on the other way, where they're trying to ram it down our throats and say, well, if you want to not be a bigot, then you have to accept everything. We have to keep that distinction. We have to double down on that distinction. Nope, you're a human being. I want you to have food in your tummy. I want you to have a job. I want you to be safe. No one's going to harm you. But I disagree with what you're doing. I disagree that sexuality is something that dooms me to a certain lifestyle. I disagree with your decisions. Yes, they are moral decisions. I think that you're in a perilous situation, but that's a different issue. Somebody says, I'm an SSA male who doesn't act on his urges, but I feel so unseen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah help you and guide you and strengthen you. What do? I apologize because I know you said today's Leo coloring on person. Yeah, well, first of all, you're a tremendously courageous person. And I would suggest that you look again at I did 2 podcasts, same one for Yaqinis too. The title of the podcast is all constructed, one with Dr. Sharif and one with Wahid Jensen. Wahid Jensen is the sheikh when it comes to this issue. Right? He's somebody who himself is in the same situation you're in. And he has a whole long podcast called Beyond the Rainbow, or Way Beyond the Rainbow, I believe, where he talks about these sorts of things. And it's really super easy to feel unseen. But you said feel unseen by Allah. And that's impossible. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, see. Allah sees everything. And Allah knows what you're going through. And if you're somebody who's holding on tight, then the reward is commensurate with the struggle that you're going through. And you have a lot to hope for in the day of judgment. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you. As you probably know, for being a chaplain, it's hard to advocate for the Muslim view. How do I talk about the Muslim view to non-Muslims and literal Muslims? I've got this down to an art. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to talk about the issues without talking about the issues. You notice how when I first started this discussion, I talked about desire. Okay? And I talked about there's 2 paradigms when it comes to desire. Either you say that I identify with my desires, therefore I'm compelled to follow through with them, or I am not my desires. I am greater than my desires, and so my relationship with my desires is one of discipline, one of training, taming, shaping, shifting, right? I just talked about it without talking about it. I didn't say LGBTQ, I didn't say homosexuality, I didn't offend anybody, I didn't do whatever. Somebody came inside our masjid one time up in Utica, and there was like, what did they say? It was like, I'm gender non-conforming, does Allah have a gender? It's like, no, Allah doesn't have a gender. Allah created the creation with gender. He's beyond gender. And they're like, okay. You can talk about things without talking about things. Don't let yourself get sucked into the prefabricated language and sort of things that they've already come up with. Right? Talk about the ideas behind the ideas. What we're really talking about is what is a human being in the first place? Right? What's the human being's relationship to their desires? How flexible or not flexible are those desires in the first place? What are we here for? What's expected of us if we should experience a certain desire or another desire? That's the way forward when it comes to the left, and especially in colleges. Okay, everything's shifted on me because things are getting uploaded. Is birth control also wasteful? It's an opinion among the ulama. That is an opinion. It's not the only opinion, but it is an opinion that exists on the books. I understand acting because of consequences in the hereafter, but what happens if we can't feel that connection to Allah? Yeah, I know I'm doing good, but feel empty and unseen. No, that's true. This is a really important question because obedience without connection can be frustrating and it can be alienating. Okay? It's not just about fake it till you make it. That's not what I'm advocating for. And that's not what Islam advocates for. You have to do the internal work in addition to the external work. Okay? And when it comes to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's literally nothing else that matters in this life except your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you don't feel a connection and you're trying to obey on the outside, may Allah reward you, that's great. But you've got to do whatever you can to try to establish and strengthen that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever it takes for you, whether it's getting close to His. A lot of times, you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being more familiar with Him. Right? You can't be close to somebody you don't know. And so to know intimately who Allah is, what He does, what He doesn't do, and to spend some time in the field, right, with the Quran, not just selectively this, that, and the other, but if you go deep into the Quran and try to make it a habit to read not just for memorization or for barakah, but to understand what Allah says, you're going to be shocked about sort of how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and how anybody who really, really knows Allah knows that Allah sees you. You can't be unseen. By Allah, never. You can be unseen by people. Everybody in this room might not see you. Sorry, I apologize. But Allah always sees you. Allah always sees you. And the more time you spend with His words, He sent His words for a reason, I think the more that you'll realize that, inshallah. Is the widespread of homosexuality in the world a sign of the day of judgment? I can't remember. Having built political power, becoming a politician means supporting the Constitution, taking an oath to uphold it. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so this comes back to a 50 discussion about, okay, I don't want to go that in depth with it. Is it handing over sovereignty to the democratic system and to the nation state to vote? No, it's not. Don't believe in the social contract. It's a myth. There is no such thing as a social contract. Okay? If you believe that voting or becoming a politician means that you're handing over sovereignty that's only due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the government, then you're taking them at face value. And I'd say, like, thought experiment. It's 2024, election year, nobody votes. Everybody stays home, nobody votes. Government packs up and goes home, right? No, doesn't work like that. There is no social contract. Sorry to break it to you. This is just a fairy tale, just like the Easter Bunny, what they tell you to make you feel good about it, right? So you get in the game, you play the game, and you don't sell your soul to the devil. It doesn't mean you have to be the politician. Okay, that's one of the things that was in the question too. There's ways of exerting control without being the face, and in fact, sometimes being the face of things can actually be a liability because you're the scapegoat, right? When you get put into a position of power. We were talking about this with some of the brothers on the way over here. Like, if you look at APAC, or if you look at even some environmental organizations, they release like report cards on politicians every year to their donors. Okay, so like APAC will actually like issue a report card about how amenable to the Israeli interests were the politicians this year. And so Chuck Schumer always gets A+ because he blank checks to Israel, and Gillibrand always gets A+ and stuff like that. And they actually go down on the list, right? So this is an organization that has found a way to exert pressure on politicians without necessarily putting forward a candidate to be elected. There's nothing wrong with doing that, okay? Having town halls where you actually invite people, if someone's going to run for school board, okay, in this district, have a town hall, invite all the candidates, and grill them, put them on the hot seat, make them feel uncomfortable. Talk about gender ideology, talk about, opt-out, talk about all these things. Make them lose sleep at night, knowing that you're out there and you're watching their votes and you're paying attention, and that you can swing the vote, right? I was telling some of the brothers in our district, in the 5th Ward in Utica, all it takes is 200 votes to win an election. 200 votes and we got it, right? Knowing those things, organizing in that way. It's not just about being a politician. Stay away from that if you can. Okay. As a Muslim, can we still call them faggots? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-An'am that if you curse the idols, people will curse Allah. Right? And so He tells us not to curse the idols. Not because we love idols, but because we don't want people to curse Allah. So, have a bit. Is it haram to provide hormone therapy as a medical provider for transgenders? Well, they're not a transgender until you provide hormone therapy, so the question is a little bit wonky, but just look at Europe, okay, if you're a medical provider. Europe has gone the opposite direction of the United States of America because they follow evidence-based medicine, whereas the United States follows consensus-based medicine. So it's subject to political pressure, to profit motive, and so it's subjected to institutional capture. Right? But in Europe, hormone therapy and invasive surgery and these sorts of things is a very, very uncommon treatment and a last resort. Okay. So they figured something out that we have yet to figure out. And inshallah, we'll come around to that. So don't think that you have to, that this is what is supporting the person. You're actually performing experiments on this person. Man, we live in a time of inversion. You know what's crazy is that people will blame Muslims for gender mutilation and look at the mutilation that they're doing. SubhanAllah. Anyway, I would advise against it. I would say do not provide if you're able to. If it's not going to put you in the poorhouse or on the street, if you're able to avoid providing hormone therapy as a medical provider, then I don't think that hormone therapy is an appropriate recourse for what people are actually going through. And Allah knows best. If giving into desires is the basis behind the LGBTQ ideology, it's one of them, yes, and the zina of the different body parts can lead to corruption, how should we see gender mixing? Yeah, facts. This is good. I'm glad the person said it like this because that's why I couched it in desire, because it does talk about a phenomenon that's larger and exceeds mere same-sex intercourse or same-sex attraction. Okay, this is really talking about Islamic sexual ethics in general. Okay, writ large, big umbrella, and these things apply to everything, right? They apply to even how we treat the opposite gender, the opposite sex. So yeah, I mean, you should. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Wala taqrabu zina." Don't even come close to it. He didn't say don't wala tafalu. He said wala taqrabu. Don't even get close to it. So there might be some minimal ways in which oath might be taken into account, but in general, obviously, the safer that you can go with that, the better. And everybody who's involved in dawah knows that you have to make compromises sometimes, especially when you're trying to reach people where they're at. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us steadfast and be people of piety and taqwa. Not a question, but please do more fitna-focused programs events. Jazakallah to you. How should we deal with non-Muslims as Muslims? I don't have the same power of influence because they do not believe to begin with. Then should I try to inspire faith? Yeah, absolutely. Faith comes first. Like, look at Lut, alayhi salam. What's the first thing that he did? He tried to appeal to their faith. Okay? You're going to have way more common ground with someone who has that sort of baseline belief than somebody who doesn't. Right? So if you're looking at sort of like a your flow chart, right, or your contingency plan for sort of what actions to pursue. Yeah, if somebody is in a same-sex relationship and they're just like, whatever, but they take the shahada, man. Maybe I'll forgive on the day of judgment, right? He's got to have priorities. Belief is way, way, way more important than the sin that they're doing. And that goes with any sin that people, if you hang around converts, you know how this goes, right? Some people, they be doing stuff, right? So take care of the shahada first, get them in the door, and just like some of the Salaf said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can guide them into the door of faith, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can continue to guide them after that. Okay, someone's asking a question about multiple wives. Come on. We're not here for that. Is it normal bad to want to be my husband's only wife? No, it's not. Okay. My workplace celebrates Pride Month, and we take an LGBTQ awareness training every month. What should I do in this case? Try to sit out. Try to say this violates my faith. I don't want to participate. And that if it's not, that it's Islamophobia or it's a violation of your First Amendment rights. This is another thing that needs to make it all the way up to the Supreme Court until we have a consensus on this as a matter of law. But if you're there's some of us who are in very vulnerable, precarious positions, and there's some of us who are in more comfortable positions. Those of us who are in more comfortable positions, someone's going to need to put this to the test to get it through the courts, that we have guidance that's going to make a way for everybody. I see some hands, but I was told to answer these, so don't be offended if I'm not calling on you. Got to scan the code, man.
Too long to write.
Too long to write? Come on, you got autofill, right? So just take it away. If reproductive system is, oh yeah, this is good. Thank you for whoever sent this question. Because when you only have a certain amount of time to talk, sometimes you have to simplify things. If the reproductive system is only meant for reproduction, then how about sex with your spouse without the intention of having children? I'll do you one better. What if you can't have children? Right? Right? Well, the Sharia works on the normative case and not based upon exceptions. Okay? Our problem in society is that we base the normal case on the exceptions, and then the society loses its orientation and its purpose. And everybody's sort of like left floundering and purposeless. Right? So the Sharia is Islam neutral? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam neutral as to whether you have kids or not? Is it like 50-50 either way? No, there's actually incentive to have children, right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to marry and be fruitful and multiply because he wants to be the most numerous of the prophets on the Day of Judgment, right? This is something that is it's something that is how do you translate it? It's like encouraged. Thank you, encouraged in our religion. Does encouraging it mean that you're any less of a person if you can't have children or if you don't end up having children? No, it doesn't. But we're trying to provide a structure and a general direction for the mass majority to go. If we treated everybody as we would treat exceptions, then everybody would lose their purpose and orientation and direction. We tell everybody, no, you should be trying to have kids and trying to have families. That family is a blessing and it's supposed to actually bring you into a relationship of accountability and transformation that's essential to your deen, right? And if we have that society and the majority of us are having strong families and having children, then if we have, a minority of people that aren't married or not having kids, then they still have a role to play. You can be that cool auntie or that cool uncle, right? But if nobody's having kids or if nobody's having strong families, then everybody loses. So there's a difference between how you create law for the majority and then making exceptions versus creating law for the exceptions and then not having anything for guidance for the majority. Am I still allowed, this is good, am I still allowed to enjoy the content of a content creator that is an SSA or trans and they act on their desires? I would caution against it because this is a deliberate strategy of the LGBTQ lobby and movement to try to humanize their ideologies through exposure to characters. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, it was Will and Grace, and like the sitcoms that came out, like first to be gay, right, or to have same-sex attractions or same-sex relationships. It was seen as weird, and then it became kind of funny and cool, and then it kept on coming down from there until it was something that was considered expected, considered that was something that was approved of. This was a deliberate strategy. If you don't believe me, there's books. After the Ball is a really important book to read if you're really curious about the history of the movement, and it surprised me, honestly, when I saw how deliberately these steps were planned out ahead of time, back in the 80s, right? So that is definitely a way to it's not simply humanizing somebody to you, it's developing sympathy in you for this type of person, right? And what they're doing, especially if they're calling to it. And I would make a distinction between someone who's actively calling to it and flaunting it versus somebody who, it's a live stream for gaming and they happen to be that, but you didn't find out until the fifth video or whatever, just like incidental. Okay, that's a very different situation than somebody who's constantly, every single episode, every single whatever, they're up in your face. They're doing dawah to you. Okay? They're trying to normalize something to you. And if you're not careful, then your moral compass is going to get skewed to the point where you're going to start to question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His guidance. Why isn't it more woke? Why isn't it more enlightened? Why isn't it more progressive? And that's scary territory to be on. This thing keeps on shifting around on me.
I think we can take one more question.
Just one more question? We're rolling. If I'm a small business owner, I don't want to serve LGBTQ, how do I reconcile between the law of the land and discrimination? Yeah, you can't, unless you can't discriminate as a business owner. It's not legal to do so unless your job is creative or considered creative speech. And this just got decided a couple weeks ago at the Supreme Court. Like, for example, if you're an artist or a cake maker, and so you're not refusing service based off of the identity of the person that's asking for your business, but based off of the message that they're asking you to participate in. So that means even if an opposite sex couple came in, a married couple of opposite sexes came in and asked you to write a pro-LGBTQ message on a cake, you have the legal and constitutional right to refuse that because of the nature of the message, not because of the identity of the person that is trying to get your business. That's where the law stands right now. The person has same-sex desires, does it really mean that they have low or wrong faith? Not necessarily. If a Muslim friend has issues with unnatural desires, how can I best support them? Again, I would come back to relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most important thing. But yeah, being there for them and trying to not let them define themselves in terms of those desires, but realize that Allah gave all of us different desires to struggle with and discipline throughout the course of our lives. We're almost through them all. If everybody's fasting, go ahead and break the fast. Ooh, is intersectional feminism and secular ed a main contributing factor towards current LGBTQ state? Most young women support the LGBTQ due to such an outlook. Yes, 100% it is. And I wish we had another whole 2 hours to talk about intersectional feminism because I before I was Muslim, I was a feminist and I took feminist studies and women's studies and stuff like that. So I know this stuff on the books, okay? And you would be shocked. You would be shocked about some of the stuff that they write about and that they say. Many people, feminism has talked a very good game, right? By trying to claim for itself every positive thing that has ever happened for women and women's rights and women empowerment. But unfortunately, that's just the public face. That there's academic feminism, there's a whole lot beside that. It's really some scary stuff that it needs to be its own talk. I look forward to my next invitation as Queens. I think we made it through almost all of them. Yeah. Perhaps, here we go, here's some pushback. Perhaps the prevalent gender dysphoria amongst youth is less sex appeal and more deviating from rigid imperialist binary standards of what the gender should be. It's unfortunately the opposite, that the imperialism is the gender ideology. The imperialism is the gender ideology and not the gender binary. If you go back to pre-modern wisdom, any place in the world on God's green earth, it has always been a gender binary. Or intersex, which is not the same as trans. Intersex and trans are not the same thing. Okay? So, who has the guns? Who's got the money? What happens when Uganda passes a law against homosexuality? You tell me where imperialism is. I'll show you where imperialism is. Who's got rainbow flags on their bombs? We do. That's where imperialism is. Imperialism is not in the gender binary. You got it backwards. I'm sorry. But you study more and you'll figure out that the imperialism is on the side of the gender ideology and not on the side of gender binary. And if you were right, then Allah would be on the side of imperialism. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He created the earth, or the everything in it, zawjayn, on a gender binary, so that we benefit from one another and complement each other. Because nobody is complete except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If your LGBTQ friend is being bullied or shamed for their orientation, should you console and support them? To the extent that you don't want them to be bullied or harmed. Yeah, we don't want people to be harmed. That's not cool. The Sharia doesn't stand for that sort of thing, right? So that's a tricky, obviously you see where you're still threading the needle here, right? You're not necessarily sort of advocating for them to be, follow your heart, do what you do, like a Disney movie, right? But at the same time, they should not be hurt. They should not be harmed. They should not have any violence sort of done to them, or the intimidation of violence. That's not something that the Sharia supports. Oh my God. All right. What's proper etiquette for gender segregation? Y'all figure it out. Advice on raising children in this environment. Yes, unplug from, don't give your kid a phone until they're 18. Social media, bad idea. Networks outside of public education. Public education is a really bad idea. If you can afford it. I know, we gotta stop. Okay. I think we finished all of them. Okay, no, but I think we finished all of them. Thank you, everybody, for your questions.
Jazakallah khairan.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله